I'm Aubrey Sitterson, and this is SKALD. What you're about to hear is an installment of an ongoing fantasy narrative that I've written specifically with your ears in mind. With my voice as the only instrument, the only method of delivery, SKALD is done in one single, flawless take. SKALD is serialized, which means we pick up exactly where we left off last time, so you might want to go back and check out what you missed before forging ahead. It's up to you, though. This isn't me reading you a story. This is me telling you a story. This is SKALD, Part 4. With night falling quickly, Roarg wanted to rest, to crawl back to his hovel, to burrow under the rags, to quiver and shake, fighting back the tremors of withdrawal in anticipation of the dawn, to cower and wait for the dual suns to rise and illuminate that nameless city, to shine their light on a new day that might bring what he craved more than anything else. The divine salve of the mind, the crutch that eases the wise man's burden, the anchor. Maul had other ideas. The aching, grinding, excruciating pain that racked his every joint acted as a stick and a carrot. His rushed, stumbling, shambling journey back across the city, driven by the pain that tormented him and encouraged by the promise of relief that would come with another dose of the anchor. With the city darkening around him, Maul drove Roarg relentlessly, forcing the terrified, cowardly, pleading beast back to the now abandoned outdoor market, back to the dark, forbidding corner that housed the drug dealer, Gradoon. Once there, panting from his exertion, fiending for the only thing capable of easing his agony, Maul released Roarg, whose filthy rags, reeking of sadness and rot, Maul had kept clenched in his fists during their forced march back to the marketplace. Maul had considered letting the poor, wretched beast do as he wished, allowing him to retreat back to his home and wait out the night, then taking all of the anchor for himself, doubling the amount of time he would be able to go without funding his new habit. He had considered that act of duplicity, of deception, of betrayal, but decided against it. Though Maul knew it was Roarg's fault that he now found himself addicted to the anchor, he also knew that it was a desperate bid by a desperate creature in dire need of assistance. And what's more, Roarg had saved Maul from the dark, scandalous city streets, saved him from the grim fate that awaited him there, saved him when he was as desperate as Roarg himself. And after all, a life tainted by addiction still offered more chance for vindication, for retribution, for triumph, than no life at all. Roarg fell to his knees, wheezing, clutching his chest as he struggled to catch his breath, but Maul had no time to waste. The sooner he received the anchor, the sooner he could ease the aching in his body, the sooner he could smooth the fragmented confusion in his mind, and the sooner he could set about finding a way to cure himself, return to his home realm, and take up the throne that was rightfully his. So, as Roarg suffered and gasped for breath, Maul just growled. "Call him." "Gradoon! We've returned! Gradoon!" That familiar chuckle began softly, growing in volume, bouncing off the walls of the alley until it seemed to be directly behind Maul. Another royal visit. My. And my mother said I'd never amount to anything. Maul spun as quickly as his creaking joints would allow him, turning his gaze upon Gradoon just in time to see the dark, spindly creature recede back into the shadows, with only his bright white smile and shining red eyes still visible. Gradoon's mocking tone struck Maul like barbs, digging into his flesh, constant reminders that despite being free from the elves, he was nonetheless still shackled, chained by addiction in this barrier realm, his future throne, his rightful throne, dependent upon the actions of a junkie and his dealer. "We have your payment. Now give us the anchor." Seeing Maul's temperature rise, his blood boiling, his rage steadily building, Roarg stepped in, terrified that the savage he had introduced to the misery of the anchor would destroy any chance of their obtaining it with his interminable anger. "Please, Gradoon, please, have pity on us." "Oh, I have pity. I have pity aplenty." Gradoon carefully sidled around the miserable pair. "But pity is not charity, and of that I have none." Maul reached into the rags that had been his only clothing for more than a decade, and he pulled out a solid gold antler, unceremoniously removed from his statue in his temple. He raised it slowly, all the while choking back the all-consuming urge to brandish his cudgel instead. This is more than enough for the both of us. Gradoon's bestial red eyes widened at the sight of his antler, an unconscious response born of greed, fear, and opportunity. In a perfect world, perhaps. But our world is far from perfect. What are you saying? You're no smarter than you look, are you, my king? What I'm saying is this. It's not enough. Not enough. Maul's fingers dug into the soft metal of the golden antler. Maul, please, please don't. Maul whirled on Roarg. You wanted an attack dog? Then an attack dog you shall have. But by the time he turned back to face Gradoon, the dealer had retreated into the shadows with only his laughter remaining. Extortioner! This antler contains enough gold for at least 30 pieces. You aren't wrong. You aren't wrong at all, my king. Gradoon emerged from the shadows once again. But I'm but a simple merchant, not a fence prepared to deal in stolen merchandise. A fence? What are you talking about? This isn't a piece of art, it's gold. Any money changer could easily melt it down and mint it into coins. Gradoon's smile turned to a scowl. Do you think me so ignorant? So clueless that I would attempt to trade, out in the open no less, one of his antlers, no doubt stolen from one of his temples? Gradoon stepped in close to Maul. So foolish as to admit complicity in such a brazen theft? No, only a junkie could be that stupid. I offer you 10 times more than you deserve, and yet you allow your fearful superstitions to get in the way. Maul, please, please, calm down. Coward! Gradoon laughed again. The foolhardy always think the wise cowardly. Right up into their dying breath. Maul's free hand instinctively slid down to his cudgel. Maul, don't. What difference does it make? If you won't do business with us, we have nothing left to lose. Now, my king, I never said I wouldn't do business. Maul, his body aching, thoughts spinning, exhausted and furious, cast his head back and howled, Enough! Enough of your riddles! Enough of your clever talk! Speak plainly before I scatter your clever brains all over the street. As Maul raged, Gradoon shrunk back into the shadows, positioning himself in relation to his customer's suffering and anguished need, like all good businessmen do. I'm not as heartless as you may think, my king. I'll accept your trade, your desperate barter, but to make it worth my while, to account for the considerable risk involved with fencing such tainted goods, you'll need to sweeten the deal. Sweeten the deal? I know that he has not one, but 2 antlers. Speak plainly. The next time your mouth opens, it will be to tell me exactly what you want, or else you will die with those clever words still caught in your throat. Gradoon's ire was finally raised, breaking him out of his tone of practiced disinterest and cynicism. He rushed out of the shadows and reared up to his full height, towering over Maul with his long, spindly frame. The other antler, you ignorant, filthy savage. Is that spoken plainly enough for your dense, drug-addled, delusional brain? Maul had been holding back. An attempt at the politics necessary to obtain more anchor, an effort to conserve his flagging energy, and underneath it all, the knowledge that he was not himself. Maul was full aware of the embarrassing fact that a skirmish with 5 ancient zealots nearly cost him his life, that his failure to keep his wits about him necessitated that he accept Roarg's help, and that his inability to read the gnarled monster's true intentions was what led him down this dark, winding path of hopeless addiction. But now, Maul was through holding back. He had played the dealer's game. He had stolen from the temple, no doubt enraging him even further. He had offered a deal that was more than fair. He had endured mocking that should have meant a death sentence for that snide, cruel, exploitative cheat. And now he was through. He was done. Consequences be damned. His aching body be damned. His very future and the earth he stood upon be damned. Maul could take no more. Even as he stood before Maul, that smoldering ball of vengeful rage, Gradoon knew that he had made a grievous, tactical error. He had spent a lifetime preying upon those whom society had beaten and broken down over long, cruel decades. He had profited off their suffering. He had taken joy in their pain, amused himself like a cat with a mouse, growing bold in his confidence that none would dare strike him back. He'd assumed that Maul was no different, that he was made of the same weak components as all those willing to cede control of their fate to outside forces. He realized the grave extent of his mistake as Maul's vice-like grip closed on his fur-covered throat. Parasite. Cruel, sadistic monster. You wish to extort me? You want both his antlers? Is that it? Gradoon tried to pull away, desperate for the sanctuary of the shadows, but Maul's grip was too strong. Even in his agony, with the joints of every finger throbbing, Maul would not release his quarry. Maul, stop. Please, please, you can't. You want both antlers? Is that it? Both of his shining, gleaming, golden antlers? As Gradoon flailed, his long, thin arms and legs battering his assailant to no avail, Maul's grip tightened. If you want them so badly, I'll send you to see them in person. I'll drag you down to the roiling underneath where he makes his home. My mind is shattered already, and I have nothing left to lose. I've been there, and I've returned unbroken. Would you be so lucky? Would you? Maul was overcome with rage, quivering as he spouted threats he had no idea how to make good upon, but knowing that his rage, would find a way. As he shook and quaked with fury, anticipation, bloodlust, and desperation, a thick, low, compact figure slammed into his side. It was Roarg. Though initially conflicted, as he hated Gradoon more than Maul could even comprehend, he eventually reasoned that as evil as the dealer was, he was still the only source for the anchor. So he threw himself at Maul, not as part of some calculated attack, but as a frantic, last-ditch effort, desperate to keep hope alive, dreaming that by saving Gradoon from certain death, he could earn another taste of that divine salve of the mind, even just a single day's worth of that sweet crutch, the anchor. As Roarg and Maul collapsed in a swearing, thrashing, howling pile of rags and flesh, Gradoon fell to his knees, greedily sucking in air as he scrabbled back into the shadows. Once there, and with his lungs full, he pursed his lips together and let out a shrill, piercing whistle that shot through Maul and Roarg's drug-addled brains. Still tangled together on the ground, they stopped struggling as their hands shot to their ears, trying in vain to block out the whistle's insufferable pitch. When Maul and Roarg made it to their feet, they found that they were no longer alone with Gradoon in the alley. They had been joined by the city guard, a corrupt gang of thugs, some human, some less than, but all summoned by Gradoon's shrill whistle. Maul counted 6, but these weren't debauched old men or even arrogant, cowardly drug dealers. They were mercenaries. Men trained to fight, to win, and to kill. And Maul, clothed in rags and with a cudgel as only weapon, was no match for their chainmail, swords, spears, and shields. Roarg, what have you done? They don't care about us. They don't. We're just addicts. They'll let us assassin. Burglars. Gradoon, emerging from the shadows once again, coughed and sputtered. Those that murdered his priests and ransacked his temple. The big one. He carries his antlers. You junkies need to learn your place. The captain of the guard stepped forward, a scowl forming under his long, beak-like nose. But no worry. There's always room for your kind in the mines. The guards slowly, carefully surrounded Maul and Roarg, their swords wielded with the flat side out, their spears held like clubs, their shields brandished for bashing. They had every intention of taking the two junkies alive, sentencing them to a hellish life of servitude in the hot, steaming, noxious gas-filled mines that provided what little wealth this barrier realm could boast. Maul, what do we do? What do we do? We fight. Maybe you, but they'll kill me. If you do, they might. But if you don't, I most definitely will. The guards were more used to hauling in vagrants and settling drunken squabbles than facing down a true warrior. So the first one was ill-prepared for when Maul launched himself at him. His scream ended in a gruesome gurgle as the tip of his golden antler sunk deep into his neck. Maul fell to the ground with the guard, struggling to remove the makeshift weapon from his neck. He had given enough. More than enough had been taken from him. He would not lose what little he had to barter with in this unknown world. But the curved antler had hooked itself on the guard's windpipe, and in the brief moment Maul took to free it, another guard had flanked him, then smashed him full on with his banded wooden shield. Maul fell to the side, his instincts kicking in as he rolled to escape the spears and flat sword edges, crashing down in an attempt to batter him into submission. Don't kill the big one. The miners buy their slaves by the pound. Out of the corner of his eye, Maul saw Roarg, already subdued by a single guard, weeping and crying, proclaiming his innocence, claiming that Maul had forced him into the burglary, had threatened his life if he didn't go along with it. Enraged by the lies being spouted by that gnarled, miserable beast, Maul lunged at Roarg, intending to make good on his promise. But before he could move a single step, the flattened edge of a sword struck his temple. Stars filled Maul's vision, and he crumpled to the ground ever so briefly. Though it was only for a moment, it was still long enough for the guards to retake their position, closing ranks around him, then battering him with sword, with spear, with shield. Keep at him! The captain of the guard saw Maul twist and roll, trying and failing to dodge the endless barrage of blunt objects raining down upon him. Maul covered his face with his hands, trying to protect his skull and the already shattered psyche it contained, allowing his coarse, hardened body to suffer the brunt of the assault. Their leader saw Maul's eyes clenched shut, his mouth open, his teeth bared, and so the captain let out a sadistic guffaw. This savage isn't so tough after all. Look, he's crying. But Maul wasn't crying. He was laughing. Maul knew that this fight wasn't a sprint. It was a marathon, and his body, though it ached from withdrawal, was still hardy enough to take a beating, to absorb ghastly levels of punishment, to take countless blows over and over and over again, all while waiting patiently, masochistically, for the opportunity. An opening large enough for Maul to lash out with a series of blows that, unlike those he was currently assailed with, would actually count. So why was Maul laughing, despite the blood streaming down his face? Why was his mouth pulled into a crazed rictus grin, even as his body broke out in red welts and purple bruises? Why did his torso convulse with laughter instead of with the racking, heaving cries of a doomed man? Because Maul saw his opening. He dropped the pair of golden antlers. He'd picked them back up when it was his foes on the ground. Then, defying all logic, he leaned into a clubbing spear, absorbing the blow on his shoulders as he roughly grabbed the weapon and pulled, sending the off-balance guard at the other end plummeting to the ground, the crash of chainmail on stone ringing out in the darkened marketplace. The guards were amazed that the blood-soaked savage was still moving, and they stood stunned, not wanting to accidentally strike their fallen comrade. The captain tried to bark out an order, but it died in his throat as Maul jabbed the butt of the spear into the soft, unprotected flesh of the captain's neck. Maul was a tornado of flashing violence, a whirlwind of hate and rage, flecks of blood and sweat flying off his long, matted hair as he struck the flailing guards. Without the guiding voice of their captain, their cohesive unit split into scrambling, fearful individuals, concerned less with subduing their captive and more with simple, craven self-preservation. They were those who doled out the beatings, believing that it was their duty, their inalienable right to do so, unaccustomed to having the tables turned, to have violence directed toward them. Exposed for the fearful, Cowardly and cruel bullies that they truly were, they retreated, falling back individually, despite the fact that with but a small amount of coordination, they could have easily overtaken the raving, spitting savage before them. Do you know who you oppose? Maul swung his cudgel in a wide circle. Though he staggered from his aching limbs, the craven guards still scattered like roaches before him in his mighty, booming voice. My tribe conquered as your ancestors scrabbled in the dirt. My throne was forged before your race crawled out of the depths. My place, my birthright, my destiny lies written in the very stars above, and you oppose me? A simple, clear, almost joyous voice replied, yes. And Maul was laid low, struck down not by a physical blow, but a psychic one. His hateful, confused, rage-filled dreams crept over his splintered mind, blanketing them with the haze of sleep. As his heavy lids closed, he saw the culprit, an apprentice dream mage, employed by the city guard and summoned by Gradoon's shrill whistle. Slight, grinning happily, unarmored and wielding only a simple staff that he touched to Maul's temple, casting the sweaty, bloody savage into the yawning chasm of his unconscious mind. Maul found himself in the shattered landscape of his psyche, crouched warily on a bit of solid ground, surrounded by rough, craggy fissures, scars left from his time in the roiling underneath. The dream mage was but an apprentice, and thus struggled to traverse this damaged mental landscape. Calm yourself. He hopped from island to island, nimbly leaping over the dark, terrifying gaps in Maul's mind. Maul quivered, shaking, as even here in his subconscious mind, his rage would not be subdued. Release me. This is your only warning. The dream mage laughed. I've never even heard of, much less seen a mind as damaged as yours, and you would give me warnings? He hopped again, landing on an outcropping, suspended in the void, adjacent to Maul's own small island. You'll be taken to the mines. That much is for certain. But whether you go with what's left of your mind intact is up to... Suddenly, the dream mage ceased his arrogant monologue, cocking his head to the side and listening. Maul, the fury overtaking him, began to chuckle, his laughter joining with, melding into, and spawning a mighty roar within the surreal landscape. As the dream mage realized what was happening, it was too late, and the mighty torrent of Maul's indomitable rage cascaded around them. Rapids of anger, hate, and retribution flowed through the deep fissures, striving upward, flooding the bits of stranded earth that still remained within Maul's psyche, overtaking the dream mage, pulling him under, drowning him in the deep, dark waters of Maul's fury. The dream mage lay on the ground, babbling, gibbering, weeping, unable to fathom the shocking, horrifying depths of rage he had just plummeted into. Maul slid back into the conscious world to find that the guards, having quickly regrouped, were in the midst of binding him with strong, hempen rope. His mind still fuzzy from the dream mage's failed attack, Maul thrashed, casting the ropes off as he began to struggle once again with his attempted captors. But before their skirmish could escalate, stop! A shining light illuminated the darkened marketplace as a group of armored warriors, covered head to toe in plate metal, their faces obscured, surrounded Maul, the guards, Roarg, and even Gradoon, still cowering in the shadows. Their leader stepped forward, pointing a long, glowing broadsword directly at Maul. Release him. Now. So, you've come for me. Maul kicked the raving dream mage aside and retrieved his cudgel. The captain of the guard, his voice returned to him, tried to take control. What is this? Who do you think you are? The warrior cast back that gleaming helm, revealing a gorgeous, furious face, shining brighter than the royal elven plate she wore so proudly. She sneered, terrible in her beauty. I am Enlith, Queen of the Elves, and by the divine right of vengeance, the lifeblood of that savage is mine, and mine alone, to spill. If you enjoyed what you just heard, please give SKALD a good review on iTunes, Stitcher, or preferably both. Reviews are a big part of the algorithm that determines which podcasts get featured, so they'll go a long way to helping more people find out about the show. If you want to chat, come find me on social media. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, they're all just Aubrey Sitterson. AubreySitterson. No spaces, no numbers. Or you can head over to my website, aubreysitterson.com, spelled the same way, for links to everything, including social media, my non-SKALD related projects, t-shirts, credits, bio, and contact information. Finally, if you're enjoying SKALD, please tell your friends in real life, online, anywhere you can find them. Thanks for listening. I'll talk at you next week.